Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, today we have a return guest. This is Master Hebes, also known as Scott Hebert. Scott, this time around, almost a year since last time we spoke. Are you prepared to engage?
Oh, always.
Let's go ahead. Let's do this again in a different vibe that we're going to have in this episode, because Master Hebes is a passionate and dedicated teacher who has taught K-12 physical education as well as grades 7 and 8 sciences for the past 9 years. His professional motto is, "Would you want to be in my classroom?" And it's reflected in his daily teaching. He's deeply passionate about engagement, student connection, and relationships in the classroom. And he also believes that when connected together properly, you can pique the interest in all the students. He also believes in innovation in the classroom, where he is constantly challenging himself to put new practices into play, especially into gamification. He was the recipient of the 2013 Alberta Excellence in Teaching Award and the 2015 Gamification Education Project of the Year. He has also been fortunate enough to share his ideas in 2 different TEDx groups, most recently with the University of Alberta, and was the Alumni of the Year. Congratulations in the year 2017 for Human Kinetics at Laurentian University. I'm not sure I got that one right.
You got it, yep.
So Scott was also episode 14. If you haven't listened to his toughest gamification moments, top recommendations, daily life, you can also click pause and go back and listen to that episode as well. However, Scott, we're here today to speak about new things. It's going to be a different episode, and I want to kickstart all this jazz with you giving us a quick preview into your new book.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for having me again there, Mr. Professor Game. I am really excited to do it and just talk gamification. So the new book, playing off of my Press Start to Begin title from the previous one, I called it Insert Coin to Continue. And it kind of goes into the more advanced ways that you can use gamification in the classroom. And it's got kind of a huge focus on using elements of Dungeons and Dragons to really help kids with reading, writing, statistics, math, and really develop cross-curricular gamification. Especially where I'm from in our community, that's a pretty low thing. So I wanted to make sure in my gamification, it wasn't just science. I still meet all my science goals, but I hit a lot of that cross-curricular material to kind of help across all of the subjects that the kids have. And then it kind of goes into just deeper elements of game design that I kind of skim the surface on in the first book. So while the first book is a guide of how would you gamify a classroom start to finish with some research and some backing, which I always refer to as the sword and the shield, to defend it against people who might come and attack you for ruining quote unquote education or something, all the crazy things you hear about gamification. The second book is, once you've got a grasp on it, about how to dive into some really deeper elements, a little bit more creative approach, hands-on kind of stuff.
So I'm guessing that the first book is sort of for starters, and this second book is more for people who have already been into this world and how to sort of up their game. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. If you haven't read my first book, the second book is a little bit of probably be a bit confusing because I would reference the first book. So yeah, I would definitely say that you'd have to know gamification in order to read the second one and have it kind of reach its full potential.
Fantastic. That sounds very, very interesting. So I wanted to get very quickly, again, you gave us an overview, especially of your book, of your second book, but give us another overview of your first one. Which are the types of subjects that you do on your first book, just so we get a general feel of how these books connect together?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so what it is it's actually not specific to different subjects. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to write a book for any teacher of any subject level. I've had teachers from kindergarten all the way through to universities purchase the book and apply different techniques. So it's kind of the framework, the skeleton about how to gamify a classroom. Everything from the difference between narrative and story and selecting theme and designing work and all those different kinds of things. And then you populate the meat on the skeleton essentially with your own core subjects that you teach. So it's it's been really well received. I've received a ton of positive feedback from it. It's an easy read. It's actually a gamified book itself. So it follows the story of a teacher trying to motivate their kids who uncovers a secret letter. They meet Master Hebert in the forest, and he walks them through the trials of gamification. And it's kind of fun to read. There's some choose your own adventure elements to it. And I mean, I'm not an avid reader, so I wanted to write a book for somebody that would be an easy flowing kind of read. There are some spelling mistakes and grammar in it. I'm not perfect, but the cool part is a lot of teachers who have read it have said that it makes it authentic. It makes it kind of real. And so I put it through the editing ring as many times as I could, but I'm going to kind of keep it as is because I think it just shows that we don't have to be perfect as teachers too, to still get our messages across. So yeah, I guess in summation, it is a walk through step by step about how to gamify your class, and it gives you, again, some of that sword and shield about how to defend it against people who might have questions about its authenticity or all kinds of the things that you see because education is so stagnant that when you try to change it, you get a lot of critics that pop up that worry about everything imaginable, it would seem, when in reality, everything is just fine.
It's sometimes it feels like it's a lot simpler than some people are painting it for us. It's like, oh yeah, this is so complicated, so complex, so difficult, etc. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not. Of course, the easy thing would always be to just do the regular and have people sit down and listen to your, massive knowledge. And that for the professor for the teacher is always going to be a lot easier in the sense of preparation and how much work you put into it. But the rewards, again, intrinsic and extrinsic that you get from that are not even going to be, in my opinion, comparable to what you get from something like gamifying your classroom in a very, very nice way.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think that one of the things when I speak about this anywhere that I talk, whether it's a podcast or in person with people, is I say that we as teachers are master complicators. We are really good at looking at something that could be really simplistic and complicating the heck out of it, and then creating something that doesn't work by accident or, maybe even sometimes with personal sabotage to say that you can't do it. So while a gamified classroom can look crazy and off the wall and disorganized, everything is actually running itself. And after you put in the hours of design, the class is a pretty self-sufficient space. So I think that, yeah, the motivation you get, the enthusiasm, the collaboration. Actually, ironically enough, I just filming a video for a new game using Connect 4 shots to do a rapid fire trivia game. You should have seen the engagement. Kids running around cheering. And they're remembering this knowledge. And I'm going to, they have their boss battle tomorrow. So yeah, my advice is always don't overly complicate things and don't shoot it down before you've actually taken the time. And again, that's feedback I've heard from both my books is, I didn't think it was this simple to do. I just had to sit down and lay out kind of just this basic plan and then talk to my kids and go from there.
I think a nice thing as well that again, my experience is more in higher education, but in general, what I've found is when doing these gamified experiences in general, there's many ways to do this. But once you do it for the first time, you can certainly make improvements. But making improvements is a completely different game than creating it from scratch. So if you see it from sort of an ROI perspective, return on investment perspective, of course you have to put like a front loading a lot of effort initially, a lot more effort. But after that, you can just almost rinse and repeat, of course, with improvements, with many things that you can change. But it just gets a lot easier after you've done it for the first few times. What would be your feel around this as well, Scott?
Well, 100%. So the first year I did it was chaos. It was such a learning curve for me. But then what I did was at the end of the year when I was writing the students' report cards, I said, wait a second, if I can give them a report card to assess their ability to be a student and learn and all those different criteria, I said they should be able to assess me, especially as kind of my guinea pigs in gamification. So I gave them a report card that was empty and I said, fill it in for me. And I said, you can write anything it is that you'd like as long as it's got constructive feedback. So whether you liked it, you loved it, you hated it, just give me what you would change. And then to kind of use your rinse, lather, and repeat, or whatever the shampoo analogy is, I went around and I over the summer, I read their feedback and they were like, this didn't work. And if it was a one-off from somebody, I was like, okay, well, maybe you didn't like that specific element yourself. But then, if I had out of my 110 kids that did it my first year, if I had 70 kids say, oh, we didn't do this enough, or we did this way too much, then I revamped it And I continued to add different elements as I learned more about gamification. So once you have your framework set, it's so much less scary and daunting than people really believe it, really sometimes view it. It's you kind of take the advice from the students, who I think are often way too ignored in education in general, and you tell them, what did you like, what did you not like, and then you add your improvements to the next year. And again, the setup gets smaller and shorter.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Scott, we were talking about this whole sort of rinse and repeat sort of way to approach these things. What would you tell somebody who is, again, they've never done it, and I know you've given a lot of advice for those people in your book, but if they're really, really afraid, they don't know what to do, they feel it's a daunting task. What would you say is like as the entrepreneurs would say, the minimum viable product, the smallest thing they can do to test this out and see if they are on the boat or if they rather run in the opposite direction?
Oh yeah, no, and that's a great question. So again, this is something that I address pretty regularly. What I wouldn't recommend if it's a relatively new thing for you is what I did, which was develop a year-long thing and just jump right in and go for it. I'm kind of a risk taker and I love the challenge, so I did it that way. But the easiest way to do it is what I kind of had some teachers do this with a lot of success is come in on a Monday, know that you're going to have kind of maybe a test or something the following week, and just write the number 4 on the board and then act like you don't know how it got there. Guys, who's coming in? Who's writing on my board? What's going on? And then the next day, put a 3, 2, and count down to 0 to the Friday. So what you're going to do is you're going to captivate the kids' attention with who's writing it. They're going to believe it's you, believe it's each other. They kind of start talking, creating their own stories. It gets kind of funny. And then on Friday, when the kids show up in class, have something covered with a cloth. For me, I have a bunch of different games through my YouTube channel that I kind of show people. And my YouTube channel is just found under Master Hebes. If you look, so there's all kinds of just mini review games. So one I recommend is with Jenga. I call it Tumbling Tower. You just pull bricks after you get trivia questions, restack the tower, knock over the tower, lose your points. Really simple game, but it captivates the kids like nobody's business because now their work has a purpose. So I play this game. I give them a prize of where I will answer a 1-point question on a test. So let's say you got 50 questions on a test. 1 point is virtually nothing, but to a kid who is like, oh, I don't know what question 35 is, I'll never understand. Oh my God, the teacher can answer this for me. For them, it's the world. So when you start with those little things, you will see how just using different language, elements of fun and collaboration with a little prize at the end really captivates kids. And then if that works for you, you start to build a narrative around your next kind of iteration of it, which is you would say, okay, next, I'm going to gamify maybe for a week. And I'm going to give, so I did this with a kindergarten teacher where I said, they did this little game and it worked. And they said, I want to do it more, but my kids aren't going to be capable of doing a year thing. I said, well, do a week or two. So she had a coffee mug that she used all the time. The kids knew her for it. And one day it went missing. And then the kids had to solve lessons to get clues. And then the clues led to where the mug was. And they like stormed the principal's office who was in on it. He was drinking from the mug. The teacher let him know they were coming after they had solved all the clues. And the kindergartens, all 30 of them or whatever it was, ransacked the principal's office. And we caught you. And so you can go in incremental steps. Absolutely.
That makes again a lot of sense. But one thing that I'm listening to you, and again I'm playing the devil's advocate for sure, because I am completely convinced of this approach. But what if when somebody hears that and says, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun," but are the kids really learning anything new? How is this improving their learning? What would you say to such a concern?
What I would say is immediately my test results and the test results of teachers that I have helped develop stuff has just been absolutely phenomenal. The average increase I see in grades is 7 to 12%, but I've seen extremes as kids who have failed grade 7 science and got in the 90s in grade 8 with me. It's a different way in which to captivate a kid's attention. And the other argument I always say is the alternative is your traditional classroom of desks and rows and textbooks and teacher lecture and student worksheet. And I say, well, does that actually work? Does the information actually ingrained, or is it you go back to the rinse, repeat, remember, rinse it out, shake your head out, you don't have it anymore, and then you move on to the next material. So I've been finding even at the end of the year, I find a higher retention in our final exams, which are year-long culminating exams. So when you engage a kid at a level that they understand, respect, and appreciate, the information sticks more, comparatively speaking, than the traditional bump and grind of school, which many kids like, to be clear, it's not their fault that they're often disengaged with school. They live in an era of time where they're absolutely bombarded with stimulus 24 hours a day. So for us to say shut all that off for 6 hours in a day and pretend it doesn't exist is completely ludicrous. So we have to meet kids where they are. The same way you'd have to meet kids with the world they were in the 80s and in the 60s and in the 40s and in the 20s and any era of time that you're in. You have to meet the kids where they're at. And this constant bombardment of stimulus and interactivity and connection with social media and phones and video games and all that kind of stuff, that's where the whole rationale of gamification really comes into play for me in education. Is I'm meeting them where they're at and I'm connecting with them on levels they understand more. And in turn, I'm getting better quality work, better engagement, and better retention.
Absolutely. And to complement a little bit more and to take it even a step further, when you're creating a game, it's not, and it's always hard to understand for people who haven't been there and who haven't seen it, but you're not creating a game just to entertain. You're putting the context to the game. You're putting challenges in the game. You're putting many things into your game, into your gamification design, which are for people to actually see the content that you're trying to get through. This happens in K through 12, in higher education, in training for adults. This could be done in any single context. But the thing is, you have to remember, of course, and as many gamification experts would always like to remind, it's not just about the fun. Remember that if the fun would be a consequence of a great design, because you're designing with an objective. You want to make sure, for example, if your learning objective is this, you want to make sure that objective is there, and that your gamification or your game are there to engage the kids, as Scott was saying. So you have to bring that all together so that people are more engaged. And again, as Scott was saying, the alternative is the usual, which I wouldn't say is never working, but I'm pretty sure it's not working most of the time. And there's many things that can be absolutely improved.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I can give you just a really quick example on that. So a concept I teach is density and viscosity. So, the rate of flow and the amount of particles essentially in something, and they're completely sequential and they work together. The higher the viscosity, that affects the density layers and all these things. But I really had a hard time with kids to grasp the concept, because for them, what does a 12 or 13-year-old kid care about that? So you have to figure out a way to make them care. So all of my work designing quests gives a scenario that they're in and an objective they have to complete, but there's no paving the road in between, which is what I think education does too much. We just want to look good as teachers, so we answer too many questions and do too many things for kids, and in turn, we take their learning away, because when they struggle, we want to jump in there and save them right away, but struggle is where learning occurs. So what I do is, the story is, you come across, you see a fire in the distance, you get to it, and there's a farmhouse or whatever scenario you'd want on fire, and you find this old pump, and my game being medieval, your steampunk recognizes that, oh my goodness, this is this pump he's heard about and he's read about it and he thinks he can fix it, but they don't have any water. So the farm hand comes out and says, here's what I have, and it's just a bunch of different liquids. So I put a bunch of different random liquids, oils, shampoos, all kinds of randomness in a bucket, and I say the steampunk determines it has to be the least viscous liquid, or it's gonna goop up inside the machine and break it. But what I do is I put rubbing alcohol as one of the liquids, which of course is flammable. So the kids have to perform a viscosity ramp test to prove the viscosity of the liquids, then verify their results by building a density tower, and then take that and prove to the farmhand that they have the best or least viscous liquid to go through the pump. And then if they're correct, they put out the fire and they get to search and they find a prize. If they're wrong, the building burns down. I put rubbing alcohol for thinking, because every year I have a group or two who selects rubbing alcohol as the least viscous liquid, but in turn they build a flamethrower. They don't build something to put out water because it's flammable. So when it comes to the test, I see kids actively mouthing and remembering that quest when they're answering questions about viscosity and density. So a lot of people, like you mentioned, when they hear gamification, like, oh, you just play games and you want to pander to kids and you don't want them to really learn. But in all actuality, I am pushing them more than I've ever pushed them by creating these scenarios that give the work purpose. And that's one of the things that kids want is, why do I have to do this? Well, here's a scenario that hypothetically could exist.
That's absolutely fantastic, Scott. And I now want to get a bit more into the deeper levels that you were mentioning about your second book. And how can you, like, if we've been practitioners in education, in learning, how can we up our game? What would be some advice that you would give us for people like us who have been maybe doing some gamification, a lot of gamification? What would be your advice to we've been doing it already? How can we up our game? Which is precisely the argument in your book. Don't give it all away, of course.
Well, one thing, I guess, kind of like my stamp on gamification I'm trying to do is use tabletop. So I've created this thing called a battle board, which runs off of a modified version of Dungeons and Dragons. So I want to be really clear. I've never actually played Dungeons and Dragons, but I've watched videos and I've spoke to people who played. And essentially the premise is your characters come to this scenario and they can search, and you have a dungeon master who answers all their questions and gives them scenarios that they have to make decisions on. So I have where kids can earn roles on this custom-made tabletop that I've created, and I act as kind of a modified dungeon master where they move through their character throughout this board, earning the roles, as I mentioned, and they come into scenarios where they have to either battle monsters or save people or help people, similar to the questing work that they do. But it forces them to make group decisions, and then it forces them, because I use kind of higher language, it forces LA or language arts and comprehension and math and statistics. So you fight monsters and all kinds of different things. And if you come up to one and they have better weaponry or armor than you have to look at the weapons and the armor that you have, and then those are all tied to rolls of dice. So it teaches them odds and statistics and calculated risk taking. And it's easily become the most popular element of my classroom because it gives a lot of what they do purpose and significance. Because now it's, okay, you just go back to that example. You've helped the person, you find this thing, you get extra rolls, you move, and then you come across somebody who gives you a vial of sand. And they say, if you can tell me what this sand does, then I'll give you a prize because I can't figure it out. And what I give to them is a beaker of hydrophobic sand. And they have to figure out what it is with no explanation or no anything. So as they go through all of these steps, I found that that's just been incredibly captivating to kids, this whole element of a battle board. And what I've started to do this year is change the battle board to match the seasons or the units that we're in. So right now it's winter in Canada, so I've got kind of a wintry layout. The next one they're going to go is a broken down city. So I'm currently building broken cities out of foam board and stuff. So that's been something that I found is really captivating because you can go really in depth with it and add all kinds of side missions, bonus stuff, really in-depth extras to really drive home certain concepts.
I'm getting the feel that most of what you're proposing is very physical, and typically when people think of gamification, they think of video games, they think of digital stuff, they think of these crazy programmers who are seeing zeros and ones. What's your take on that? Is because I've also heard and seen many people saying that the whole physicality of things gets people attracted precisely because we're living too much in a digital world. So what would be your take on that physical sort of versus, not really versus, but complemented with digital world in a way? What would be your take on that situation?
Oh, well, actually, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. Like I mentioned earlier, kids are just bombarded with technology at all hours of every day. Even most school districts now have one-to-one Chromebooks. So even kids who struggle with reading now, you get software that allows them to read, and it doesn't actually force them to learn how to read. So I am so big on the physical element. I have physical game cards, physical shops, physical battle boards, physical avatar representation of their characters. I have everything physical in my classroom. I've actually almost stripped it entirely of technology because I get a better connectivity on kids and a better connection with kids because they're forcing themselves. And there's more natural consequence. So when in the past, when I had some digital elements, I'm like, oh, you lost your cards, and I'd go wipe out a digital inventory. They didn't care. But if they die in my game and they have to physically walk up to me and give me everything that they've earned, that's a physical thing that they hold on to. I was mentioning I did that Connect 4 game. The prize was a packet of cards. So to drive home that Yukai Choose core drivers, one is unpredictability and curiosity. I take tinfoil, I wrap up cards, I make a custom sticker label, and you should see the excitement and the joy of kids when they're tearing open a tinfoil package of just custom made cards for the game. That physical element is so huge in the connection with kids when all they're surrounded with is digital. To go back to the roots of games and fun, which was that tactile element. I found has been like exponentially more engaging to kids than the pure digital element. And I know that there are companies that exist on pure digital platforms, but it doesn't have that same lure to kids as that physicality because it's so different to them.
And as well, it's not only that. You mentioned Yu Kai Chao. He also has, he has his 8 core drives, and he has sort of he calls it like a hidden drive as well, which is sensoriality or something like that. It's the 9th core drive, and it's precisely about the sensations that you get and the pleasure in general from that, touching things and things that make you feel great. It's again almost about stuff. So I'm probably butchering the way that he sees it, and he'll slap me when he sees me. No, he won't slap me. He'll say, "Rob, what are you saying?" But it's something around that. I would have to reread part of his work. But he also mentions that element, and I completely agree that I don't know if only going completely physical is the way for everybody. Again, the depends on your target group. Your target group is seemingly, and as well, you have a lab, which is a very physical sense that you get from that. But I do think that adding that physical element drives a different kind of engagement. I've also heard Monica Cornetti talking about how she had a group of grown-ups, very serious people, fighting over a crown because she was talking about the crown of the jewels for the crown in a Snow White tale. So that physical, it's a crown that's not worth $5 to $10 or maybe even less, and they were fighting over it because they wanted to win it, and they saw it there, and it's that element of just seeing and being able to touch that element that you're being either rewarded with, or you're being taken away, or you've earned in some way. You have more mana, you have more HP, you have whatever, and you have it in your hands. It's a completely different feel. And again, going back to the core drives, there's a lot more of ownership once you have that object in your hands. Now it's yours, rather than having it in an app, which you don't really feel is yours. You have your avatar, you have all these things, but it's not as yours as that card that you're holding in your hands. So I have to completely support that argument that you were going through there. And as well, you were talking about that sort of Dungeons and Dragon focus that you're talking about, but we were also talking in the pre-interview chat that you were talking about this move that you had in buildings, in which you had sort of a new high school, and that became the new middle school. I'm not sure exactly how that played out, but I wanted to know more. What are the lessons learned that you got from that, and what gamification, what your gamification practice profited from, and what were the challenges as well from that, not maybe necessarily sudden, but from that massive change?
Yeah, so the first time 4 years ago when I designed my physical space, truthfully, I didn't know what I was doing. I was completely new and completely green to the whole process of gamification. So I was putting stuff all over the place at random, and I didn't really quite have any goals or ideas. I was just kind of doing a lot of feelers with kids and figuring, okay, they like this, they respond to this, oh, no one's interacting with that. And then I continued to up the classroom until last year when they completed the construction of a brand new high school. So the old high school building was sitting vacant. So they decided to move our middle school into the old high school. So I got a humongous high school science classroom. And I stripped the thing right down there, and I started from absolute scratch, and I went through the 8 core drivers, and I started to add a variety of different elements into the classroom to meet those core drivers to motivate kids in a variety of different ways. So I brought things back that I used to have, like shops and things like that. But then I started bringing in areas of communication. I started bringing in wheels of chance. I built a bigger battle board, multiple battle boards. I hid things in the classroom more. I repainted the classroom. I actually used an Amazon Echo, and I have voice automation in the classroom so kids can actually work in a storm. Fog machines will go off, all kinds of stuff to create a real feel and element. So I designed a space that fits something completely in the medieval element that I was hoping for, so I can bring a variety of the scenarios I say in the quest that I described earlier actually physically to life. So if it says you're working in the dark, I can talk to the Echo and it'll shut all the lights off, and they have to figure out how to work in the darkness and maximize minimal amounts of light to meet my reflection and refraction elements I have in one of my units. And we have staircases in the school now, which we didn't have in my previous. So when they climb a lighthouse to fix something, I actually make them run up and down the stairs get tired, spin around, get dizzy. Then I give them the work to meet again that real life scenario that they would encounter. So the new physical space has just been incredible in terms of my ability to really push the gamification platform by hitting so many of the things that I now understand better as opposed to my understanding of it 4 years ago.
So basically, you almost hit the reset button in a way and started this over.
Yeah, in terms of the design of the space, absolutely. I took feedback of 4 years, and then I looked at those core drivers and said, I really don't meet enough of this core driver or that core driver. So I started to really implement them. And again, I have a video on my YouTube channel that walks through the way I designed with core drivers. Actually, I released it last week.
Scott, listening to you, I can just almost imagine being inside that exciting science classroom, which I had a lot of excitement in science, but definitely not even near to that level of excitement. However, my big question there is, do you also have a video on how could you afford all the things because again, people, sometimes when you're talking about gamification, people think high tech, super complex, World of Warcraft and those very complicated things. And it's always nice to be able to tone it down and say, look, this does not need to be that complicated. There's a lot of even free tools that you can use. And again, I reached that level again, and people mostly would tone it down into physical elements, and it usually is a lot more affordable especially for professors and teachers like you who might be not necessarily an entrepreneur or somebody who has a lot of money. So how do you manage to put all these things together? Because it sounds like you're making a massive investment.
And that's kind of the cool part and the illusion of gamification in education is that it sounds like a huge investment, but it's really not. So I'm fortunate my school will give us a $200 budget for classroom setup. So I've used that for the course of 5 years to buy some of the things like an Amazon Echo, and things like that I've wanted to use. But I would probably say,
I have to say that when I was in Chicago, I did buy an Amazon Echo for $20. So it's pretty affordable.
And that's the thing, right? You can get these things, especially because you don't need a fancy one to do what I do. So you get an older generation and it does exactly the same thing as the new model and it's a fraction of the price. But I would say, honestly, 90% of my stuff is donated. I really have no shame and I will ask anybody and anybody for everything. So I will just explain. I have a message that I kind of send to people and I explain what I do and how I do it. And I link to my resources and I say, hey, I'm just wondering if you're willing to donate this or donate that. So I've gone to a local hardware store and they've donated foam core board and paints and stuff so that I can build physical elements for my battle board in my classroom and paint it. I've gone to buy and sell groups using Facebook for the gaming community. And I've explained the story and I said, does anyone have any extra minis for this battle board I want to do? Or, and I've emailed the families of parents at the beginning of the year for all of my students. I explained the gamified program because I obviously get a lot of questions from parents in the first couple of days. And I explain the program and then I say, hey, if you have any of the following items, collecting dust, is it okay if I have them? And you would be surprised when you are a teacher trying to do better for kids, the amount of stuff that people will give you and be so supportive of. So it looks expensive. It seems crazy, but it is actually so much of it is just me reusing and recycling materials or just taking the time and effort to create it myself at very minimal to low cost.
That's fantastic. I was kind of expecting that, but I wanted to make sure it was actually something possible and viable for everybody else out there. Scott, we are almost running out of time. This is unbelievable how time passes by when we talk about these exciting subjects. But I didn't want to leave this episode because I believe in our first episode, we didn't do this sort of gamified question where you get a question from the audience, which is asking something we don't really know of, and you get a quick stab at it and see how it goes. We didn't get that one in the first interview, right?
I don't think so.
So, this is the question. This person is a librarian, no names named. So, how can I continue my expertise as a librarian teaching information literacy or anyone else who has subject expertise and develop the expertise I need to create games that will effectively engage my students in a short one-class period? So, things like time management issues and expertise issues. What I'm guessing here is that this person is going more for something that, again, your classroom is super immersive. It's a year-long game or gamified ambient. However, this person seems to be going for maybe quicker things that a typical library is experiencing when dealing with students. Do you have recommendations for this librarian that is coming to us for some advice?
Oh yeah, for sure. What I I refer to these as guild battles. So it's like that Connect 4 game that I just used. You want to use an immersive play-based element in short periods of time, because let's say the librarian was teaching a specific sort of literary skill, like, metaphor, simile, something like that. You can take any sort of household game. I've used everything from Jenga to Sorry to Connect 4, Hungry Hippos, Pie Face, any kind of these over the counter kind of typical board games, and you can rehash the rules to follow through with trivia, whether it's individual trivia or team based, class versus you kind of thing. And what you do is you create kind of these elements. So for this Connect 4 one that I just did, in order to emphasize that they understood cell structures and characteristics of living things, I just took that game and I gave them a packet of trivia questions, and they could answer one at a time. They had to run up a runner with the answer. If they were right, they got to bounce the ball into the Connect 4 little holder, and their goal was to try to connect 4 of the colored balls together to get points. And every time they bounced the ball in, they got points. And then it created this ability where kids were super immersed, because when they got questions wrong, you would hear them go back and discuss why was it wrong? What did we miss? Oh, this is it. They'd come sprinting back up. And that hyper engagement is just something that's so easy to add to a one-off kind of lesson, or kind of culminate a few lessons of traditional maybe teaching that you would go under any kind of circumstance. Because something like a library, you're not going to be able to potentially do what I do entirely, like in terms of class setup. So you focus on the one-off kind of play-based, content-driven, curricular-driven games, where the only way they can actually play and participate in the game is to prove their knowledge of the curriculum or the material that you're trying to teach.
That makes a massive amount of sense. Thank you for those recommendations. And before we leave, I think we got something special for the engagers. You were mentioning about your new book. It's also, for those of you who are not in North America, it's also going to be available digitally so that we can all have access to that. Because, of course, sending it to South America, Asia, even Europe is sometimes a massive hassle or even a lot of cost. So there are a couple of things that you wanted to mention. Master Hebes, what would that be?
Yeah, so first I want to give away, because again, I'm not profiting. I didn't write any of these resources and stuff to be a millionaire or be famous. I just want to improve education, and I use any little bit of money to just help kind of grow my program. So I want to give back to the teaching community of any sort by giving the opportunity to win a digital copy of both my books and all the things that come with them.
Wow.
As well as if you don't win, but you still want to buy, I'll give 10% off to anyone who listens to this podcast and goes on to buy the digital versions of the books, which are found on my website. And I'll get a code set up with you for the little coupon code for the checkout on the website, which will take 10% off. So you'll get 2 digital copies of the books, either that one winner for free or a books that I sold for $175 as a set in print. You'll get them for $70 digitally.
Wow, that's a massive difference. And again, we will set up a page for this. It's today that we're recording. It's not set up, but it will be set up by the time this episode goes live. It will be in professorgame.com/masterhebes, all one word, Master Hebes, Heebs. Is that correct?
You got it.
There you go. So engagers, take a look at this new giveaway that we're doing after the massive success. I have to say that it was for the anniversary episode. Now Scott got very excited about that and said, you know what? I also want to give back to the engagers community, and he is giving us the opportunity to have both of his books in a digital version. Or we can also have access, well, if we don't win, basically, we can also have access to a 10% discount for his digital pack, which is actually not really 10%. It's a lot more from what he was mentioning. So it can be a very, very exciting opportunity. You can find it at professorgame.com/masterhebes. Scott, thank you very much again for coming back to Professor Game. You're one of the few exclusive comeback guests. This was a lot of fun for this episode for sure. I usually make mostly the regular questions. This was a completely different free flow kind of episode. However, we're running out of time, and now it's time to say it's game over. Engagers, it's fantastic to have you here. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Scott Hebert, Master Hebes. And are you using Instagram? I'm finally posting regularly and would love to connect with you there. Just like on Twitter, my username is RobAlvarezB. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know more about GameTies and its founder, Keith Unn? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!